Hello, wanderer of the quiet web. You've just stepped into a slower corner of the internet, a place where history whispers instead of shouts, where we leave behind battles and crowns, and instead follow the scent of warm bread, boiled oats, and quiet morning fires. Welcome to Sleepy Boring History, where we tell the soft, sleepy side of the past. Stories not of empires rising, but of kitchens waking, of breakfasts that came before alarms, and meals served by candlelight and morning mist. Tonight, or whenever your eyes grow heavy, we'll take a slow walk through time, one breakfast at a time, from prehistoric berries to powdered cereal, from barley beer and Egypt to toast and coffee after war. This is the story of how the world has always woken up, gently, simply, and hungrily. So if you like your history slow and soft, if you find comfort in crumbling bread crusts and ancient porridge pots, then settle in, lay back, maybe make yourself a cup of tea. And if you haven't already, tap that subscribe button and ring the little sleepy bell so you'll never miss another calming trip through time. This is what people ate for breakfast through history. And it begins right after this breath. Pause. A soft exhale. Before there were kitchens, before fire had a home, there were only hands, stones, and the quiet sky. The earliest people woke up with the rising sun, wrapped in furs or leaves, the ground cold beneath them. There were no ovens, no plates, no recipes, but hunger still stirred. Breakfast in prehistoric times was not a meal, really. It was more like a search. The first food of the day depended on what had been left behind from the night before, maybe a piece of dried meat half chewed and smoked by last night's fire. Or maybe there was nothing but frost on grass, and the morning began with walking. Imagine a mother handing a child a fistful of berries, black ones, sour but filling, or an old man slowly chewing on a roasted root, still warm at its center. Sometimes a bird egg, carefully stolen from a nest before the sun warmed it. Sometimes just water, cold from a nearby stream. There were good mornings and lean ones. A belly full of mammoth fat on one day, just a handful of nuts the next. But every morning was quiet. No talking. Just breath and crunching leaves and maybe a little smoke curling from a low fire pit if they were lucky. These people didn't call it breakfast. They didn't name it at all. But still, in their own quiet way, they broke their fast, slowly, with what the earth had to offer. And so, the human ritual of the morning meal began not in cities or temples, but in forests by rivers beneath the sky. A simple start, a timeless one. The morning sun rose over the Nile, golden and quiet. The air was still cool, though the heat would come soon. In ancient Egypt, life began early before the fields grew too hot, before the stone roads shimmered. Most Egyptians, especially workers and farmers, lived simple lives. They didn't wake to feasts. Their breakfast was plain but strong. A thick loaf of barley bread, rough and chewy, sometimes hard from the night before. It was not soft like modern bread, but it filled the stomach. Beside it, beer. But not the kind you might imagine today. This beer was thick, like porridge. Made from fermented grains, it was often lumpy, sometimes flavored with dates or herbs. It wasn't a drink to celebrate with. It was food, part of daily survival. A farmer might sit on the ground, the cool earth beneath him, his fingers breaking the bread into chunks. He'd dip it into the beer to soften it, chewing slowly, staring out over the rising mist along the riverbank. Children nearby might be eating the same, maybe with a few figs or a dried onion, if the family had any left. Breakfast was not a time for talking. It was a time for fuel for filling one's belly before hours of labor in the sun, building temples, planting crops, or hauling stone. The wealthy had more fresh fruit, honey, perhaps even boiled goose eggs. But most Egyptians knew only barley and beer. And yet, there was rhythm in it, peace even, a quiet moment before the toil of the day. So they ate, they drank, they worked, and the Nile flowed on, timeless, as another day in Egypt began. The sun rose early over the wide, flat lands between the Tigris and Euphrates. The air smelled of clay, river water, and early fires. This was Mesopotamia, the land where cities were born, where writing began, and where the first farmers tilled the earth. Before the people of Ur or Babylon set out to build walls or write on tablets, they ate. Breakfast was humble, but it mattered. A man might wake in a mud brick house, the walls cool from the night. Outside, his wife had already started a fire with dried reeds. She ground grains with a heavy stone barley mostly and shaped the flour into flat discs. These would bake quickly on a hot stone or clay oven, puffing just slightly. Alongside the bread there might be onions, sharp, pungent, and easy to grow. They added flavor to the otherwise plain meal. Sometimes there was goat's milk, thin and sour, or a bit of date syrup drizzled over the bread, a rare treat. Children chewed slowly, still sleepy. The adults ate standing or crouched near the hearth. There were no tables, no chairs, just quiet chewing and soft footsteps as the city stirred. In some homes, a stew from the night before might be reheated. Lentils, chickpeas, herbs, leftovers were precious. Nothing was wasted. The rich, if they were lucky, had figs or cheese wrapped in cloth. But for most, breakfast was simple. Warm bread, fresh onions, maybe a handful of nuts, and the knowledge that the work of the day was about to begin digging canals, shaping bricks, carrying grain. So in the land of the first cities, people greeted the morning the same way we still do now, with food, warmth, and quiet hope. Morning in ancient Greece was slow and thoughtful. The streets of Athens were quiet in the early hours. The sun rose gently over stone homes and olive groves, casting long shadows across courtyards where families were just beginning to stir. Breakfast was not grand or rushed. It was a moment of calm before the debates, the work, or the lessons of the day. The Greeks called it akratisma, a light meal taken after rising. A man might sit on a low bench outside his home, sandals barely tied, robe still loose. In his hand, a small barley cake. It was rough and simple, baked the day before, but now warmed slightly and dipped into wine or water. To make it sweeter, a little honey could be added, thick, golden, and fragrant from wild thyme blossoms. Beside him, a bowl of black olives glistened in the morning sun, their salty skin wrinkled and rich. A few pieces of white cheese might be shared between family members. No forks, no plates, just fingers and napkins made of cloth. The poor ate barley bread and perhaps garlic. The wealthy had fruits, figs, even eggs, but extravagance was not the heart of Greek breakfast. Moderation and balance were valued. A philosopher might eat the same meal as a potter, and both would praise its simplicity. Children were given porridge or soaked bread, sometimes warm milk. Elders drank water from clay jugs, or thin wine called oinos, sipped slowly in the shade. And so, in marble cities and quiet farms alike, Greeks met the morning with calm, no hurry, just a few bites, a few words, and the first breeze of the new day brushing olive trees. A peaceful start in a world that believed in harmony. In Rome, the day started early. Before the city filled with carts and sandals, before the Senate met or the markets roared, the people of Rome stirred from their sleep and sought their entaculum, the first small meal of the day. Roman homes, whether grand villas or crowded tenements, woke slowly. A boy might rise to the sound of roosters echoing between stone walls. His mother would already be cutting thick slices of panis, a coarse bread made from wheat or barley. It was firm, baked the day before, and slightly sour. Romans didn't toast it. They soaked it. A common practice was to dip the bread in watered wine, not to get drunk, but to soften the dryness. The wine was weak, thin, and often flavored with herbs. It was common even for children. In poorer homes, the bread might be dipped in olive oil or milk instead. For the wealthy, the morning might include fruit figs, grapes or pears, cheese, eggs, or even cold meat from the previous day, but still, it was light. Romans didn't believe in heavy breakfast. That was for barbarians, they said. Artisans, soldiers, and students ate quietly before heading into the dusty streets. Bakers worked through the night, and their fires still glowed as citizens stopped by for fresh loaves wrapped in cloth. The smell of warm grain drifted through alleys lined with marble columns and cracked stone. There was little ceremony, no elaborate tables, just hands tearing bread, lips sipping wine, and eyes watching the sky shift from deep purple to golden blue. It was not a feast, but it was tradition. Simple, steady, Roman. Far to the north, in the lands of long winters and smoky halls, Viking mornings began in a world of wood, stone, and silence. The wind outside the longhouse often howled across frozen fields or damp moss, but inside the fire was always burning, low and steady, smelling of ash, wool, and yesterday's stew. Vikings were not just warriors. They were farmers, traders, and families, and they needed strength for long days. That strength began with breakfast. A woman stirred a thick pot over the hearth, her wooden spoon moving slowly through bubbling gruel. This porridge was made from barley or oats, sometimes rye, cooked in water or goat milk when they had it. It wasn't sweet, it wasn't fancy, but it filled the stomach and warmed the chest. Children might sit cross-legged on fur-covered floors, wooden bowls in their hands, steam curling into the cold air. A bit of honey could be stirred in, or berries dried from the summer past. If the family was lucky, a slice of smoked fish or dried meat might be shared. The gruel was eaten with carved spoons or simply slurped. There were no forks, no porcelain, just sturdy wooden tools and calloused hands. Outside, a man might drink a ladle of warm milk before checking on the animals, his breath visible in the morning air. There was little time for talk. The fields, the forge, or the boat all waited. But for a moment, the household was still. The food was hot. The fire crackled. And the sky above the fjords began to lighten from black to blue. This was a Viking breakfast, quiet, practical, strong, like the people who ate it. The sun rose gently over the tiled rooftops of Chang'an, the great capital of the Tang dynasty. Red paper screens glowed softly in the first light. Outside, the air was cool and calm, filled with the scent of mist, plum blossoms, and distant wood smoke. In a small courtyard, a family stirred from sleep. A child stretched under a silk quilt, rubbing sleepy eyes as a grandmother quietly lit the cooking fire. Breakfast in Tang China was peaceful and warm, a meal to nourish both body and spirit. A pot of rice porridge simmered slowly over the fire. Thin, simple, and soothing, it was flavored with ginger or a dash of soy sauce. Sometimes a preserved egg or a sliver of meat was stirred in. Alongside it were soft steamed buns, mantu plump and white, stacked in bamboo baskets, their lids lifting with little puffs of fragrant steam. The buns might be filled with bean paste, minced pork, or nothing at all. Light, gentle food for a gentle start to the day. Pickled vegetables or salted radish added a little sharpness to the soft flavors. And always tea, hot and green, carefully poured from a clay pot into tiny cups. Not rushed, not sweetened, just clear and calming. A father might sip slowly, eyes closed. A mother might hum as she tore a bun in half and passed it to her daughter. The streets outside were beginning to fill with quiet footsteps. Scholars, monks, merchants, even poets headed into the city. But inside the courtyard, all was still. Breakfast was not loud. It was balance, harmony, a quiet greeting to the morning. This was how the people of Tang China broke their fast, with grace, with steam, with tea. The call to prayer echoed softly across the rooftops of Baghdad. The sky, still touched with night, was beginning to shift into gold. In the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, the morning began not with rush, but with stillness, a rhythm guided by prayer, wisdom, and warm food. In a home of scholars, or a simple clay house by the river, families stirred gently from rest. A young boy might rise to the smell of flatbread baking on a hot pan. The bread was thin, soft, and smoky at the edges, made fresh with flour and water, rolled by hand on a stone slab. On the low breakfast table, often just a mat or wooden board, were dates, rich and brown, harvested from tall palms along the Tigris. Their sweetness was deep, like honey and earth, and they were always the first thing eaten. The Prophet Muhammad himself had praised their blessings, and so they remained part of the morning ritual. Alongside the dates were bowls of thick yogurt, tangy and cool, sometimes mixed with herbs. Olive oil shimmered in a small dish, ready to be dipped with warm bread, cheese wrapped in leaves, hard-boiled eggs, a few fresh herbs from the garden. For the wealthy, there might be lentil stew, chickpea cakes, or fruit soaked in rose water. But even the humblest meal was eaten with intention, slowly, with gratitude. Children giggled softly. Elders recited verses. Outside, the city was beginning to wake. The hum of merchants, the rustle of parchment, the faint sound of a lute in a far courtyard. In the Golden Age, knowledge flourished. Science and poetry bloomed. But before all of that came breakfast. Dates, bread, and peace. In the early morning hush of a medieval village, the sound of roosters echoed between thatched cottages. Smoke curled slowly from chimney holes as the gray sky began to brighten over the frost-covered fields. There were no clocks, no alarms, only the sun and the cold to stir people from sleep. For most peasants, breakfast was a quiet matter. After all, the day ahead would be long. There were no breaks from toil, so they began with whatever food they had. On a rough wooden table, lit only by the glow of the hearth, sat a round loaf of coarse brown bread, made from rye or barley it was hard from the night before. A father broke it with calloused hands, dipping it into a small cup of ale. Yes, ale. Water was not always safe to drink, and ale weak and homemade was common even in the morning. Children drank it too, often mixed with porridge or warm milk if the cow had given any that day. Beside the bread, a lump of hard cheese sat wrapped in cloth, salty, strong-smelling, and sharp. It had to last through many days. A sliver was cut and shared, eaten with quiet chewing and barely a word. In castles, breakfast was richer. Nobles might have fresh eggs, sweet pastries, or meats, but even in stone halls, the morning meal was plain compared to feasts later in the day. Breakfast was never a celebration, it was fuel. There were no silver spoons, no soft chairs, just hard bread, sharp cheese, and the warmth of the fire before facing the cold. In medieval Europe, the day began not with comfort, but with survival. A simple meal, eaten quickly, before the long work began. In Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, morning light danced across tiled rooftops and golden domes. The sea breeze from the Bosphorus drifted through narrow alleys and marble courtyards, carrying the scent of salt, smoke, and bread baking on stones. The city was a place of both splendor and routine, and breakfast, though simple, was a reflection of this balance. In a quiet home tucked behind the bustling markets, a family gathered slowly as the sun rose, casting soft gold through arched windows. The first food of the day was bread artos, firm and fragrant, made from wheat and baked in dome-shaped ovens. The crust was crisp, the inside soft. A mother sliced it with a small knife, steam rising, as she spread thick honey over it. The honey clung to her fingers, sweet, amber-colored, and sticky. It came from hives kept in rooftop gardens or forested hills nearby. Beside the bread were bowls of olives, black and wrinkled, soaked in oil and herbs. Their saltiness was sharp, but familiar, a taste of home. Cheese, too usually soft, made from goat or sheep's milk, cut into wedges and served cool. This breakfast wasn't rushed. A father dipped bread into oil. A child licked honey from his fingers. A grandmother peeled an orange, the scent bright and fresh in the warm air. Occasionally, a visitor might sip watered wine or warm goat milk. Outside, the city would soon awaken, merchants calling, church bells echoing, sandals clapping across stone. But inside, for just a little while, breakfast was calm, gentle, almost holy. The Byzantines believed in order and grace. Their breakfast was the same simple food, taken slowly, beneath painted ceilings in soft morning light. In Edo period Japan, long before Tokyo filled with neon lights, the mornings were quiet and deliberate. The paper doors slid open softly. Outside, the garden was still damp with dew. Bamboo leaves trembled in the breeze, and a pale shaft of sunlight crept into the wooden home. The family rose early, bowing to one another in silence. Everything moved with intention, no rush, no noise. Breakfast was not a large meal, but it was sacred in its own way, balanced, honored. The fire was lit carefully in the hearth, and a small pot of rice was set to steam. The smell of it, warm and clean, filled the room like a gentle breath. Alongside the rice, miso soup simmered made from fermented bean paste, dashi broth, and tiny cubes of tofu. Sometimes wakame seaweed floated inside, soft and green like ribbons. On small wooden trays there were pickled vegetables, radish, plum, or cucumber. Their bright colors and sharp flavors woke the mouth. A piece of grilled fish, often salted salmon, might be added if the family could afford it. The fish sizzled over coals, its skin crisp and its scent sharp against the soft smells of soup and rice. Chopsticks clicked gently. The bowls were lifted with both hands. Each bite was respectful. Every part of the meal had a place, nothing too much, nothing wasted. Outside, the day was already beginning. Merchants opened shops. Farmers walked to fields. Samurai tightened their robes. But inside, the family ate slowly, sitting on straw mats, the floor cool beneath them. There was peace in every mouthful. This was Edo, Japan, where even breakfast felt like a form of quiet poetry. In the early morning haze of a Mughal courtyard, the sky turned from indigo to rose. Birds chirped in mango trees, and the scent of cardamom drifted through carved stone archways. The Mughal Empire, known for its palaces and poetry, also began its day with warmth in kitchens, on brass plates, and in clay cups. Breakfast in a noble home might begin with the slow crackle of dough meeting hot ghee. Paratha's flatbreads rolled thin, then folded and fried, puffed gently on wide iron pans. Layered and crisp on the outside, soft within. Golden and fragrant, they were served hot and stacked high. Beside them sat small bowls of chutney, mint, tamarind, mango, each one sweet, sharp, or spicy in its own way. Sometimes a spoonful of creamy yogurt or lentil stew was added. Or perhaps, for the fortunate, soft curried potatoes or a boiled egg with saffron. And then, always, the chai. This was not today's quick cup. It was brewed slowly, black tea leaves bubbling with milk, ginger, peppercorns, and clove. A woman stirred it gently as the scent filled the air like incense. The tea was poured from high above, forming bubbles in the cup, a sign of good luck and freshness. Even in the streets of Delhi or Lahore, the poor had their version of this morning meal, a simple piece of roti, a scoop of lentils, and a shared cup of chai between hands worn from labor. Whether in a marble palace or a roadside stand, breakfast in Mughal India was a moment of flavor, of family, of fragrant breath before the heat of day. A meal wrapped in spice, in steam, and in stillness. The morning light filtered through the gaps in wooden shutters, touching the rough-hewn floorboards of a small colonial cabin. Outside, the world was quiet, the rustling of trees, the cluck of hens, the steady creak of an old water wheel turning by the stream. In early colonial America, mornings were not slow, they were purposeful. The land was still wild. Days were filled with work, danger, and survival. But breakfast was a small comfort. A daily ritual wrapped in warmth, smoke, and the smell of cornmeal frying. At the hearth, a mother poured batter onto a hot iron griddle set over open flames. The batter, made from cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, sizzled as it hit the pan. These were Johnny cakes, flat, golden cakes that crisped at the edges and softened in the center. There was no wheat flour. Corn was what they had ground, traded, and harvested by hand. The cakes were served simply, maybe with butter if the cow had given enough milk, maybe with molasses, thick and dark, spooned from a heavy tin. Sometimes nothing but the taste of the fire itself, charred slightly and steaming. A tin cup of cider sat nearby, not sweet, but dry and mild. In those days, cider was safer to drink than water, and even children sipped it carefully, their fingers cold in the morning air. The fire crackled. A father buckled his shoes. A child counted the cakes. Outside, the wind rustled the forest, and the sky began to brighten. This was breakfast on the edge of a new world. Hard, simple, and earned. Each bite was warmth in the belly before the long day of chopping wood, mending fences, and building a life from the wild earth. Paris, 1760. A soft gray mist curled over cobbled streets, and the Seine glistened under a quiet sky. In the courtyards of stone townhouses and tiny bakeries tucked into narrow lanes, a familiar smell filled the air. Warm bread and something sweeter chocolate, thick and dark, slowly simmered over a coal fire. In 18th century France, breakfast was not a grand affair, but it was cherished. For the common folk, a small loaf of crusty bread torn by hand, never sliced, was the center of the morning meal. It might be yesterday's bread, dry at the edges, but softened in warm milk or dipped directly into thick drinking chocolate. Yes, chocolate. Not the bar, but a hot liquid dense, rich, and bittersweet. Brought from the colonies and embraced by aristocrats, it slowly found its way to middle-class tables. Stirred in copper pots, it was sometimes sweetened with sugar or cinnamon. The lucky ones had cream. The rest made do with water and a little faith. For laborers, breakfast might be nothing more than bread with a smear of lard or a handful of chestnuts. For nobles, croissants, buttered brioche, and coffee served in porcelain, accompanied by fresh fruit and gossip. But for many, morning began in silence. A woman sitting by a window, hands wrapped around a warm ceramic cup. A child dipping crusts into chocolate, eyes still heavy with sleep. A man folding a newspaper, crumbs on his lap. The street outside, slowly awakened clatter of carts. Soft neighing of horses, the faint ring of a distant bell. But for one quiet moment, bread and chocolate. were enough. A little sweetness before a day of revolution or routine. In France, even a simple breakfast could feel like a small act of beauty. In Regency England, the morning began with gray skies, low fog, and the soft chime of church bells in the distance. The grand houses of the wealthy stirred to life with the faint creak of polished floorboards and the quiet bustle of servants lighting fires in stone hearths. Outside, the air was damp and still, heavy with the scent of coal smoke and damp soil. Inside a drawing room, breakfast was served with quiet formality. The table was long, covered in linen. At its center, a silver pot of black tea steamed gently. Nearby, slices of toasted bread sat in a rack, golden at the edges and still warm from the fire. A crystal dish of marmalade, orange and glistening, waited to be spooned onto the toast, bitter, sweet, and fragrant with citrus peel. A gentleman might sit in his dressing gown, carefully spreading butter, then marmalade, with a silver knife. He would read the morning papers, stories of ships, parliament, and distant wars, while sipping tea, pinky raised without thought. A lady, seated nearby, might take only a boiled egg and a whisper of toast. It was not just a meal. It was an image of manners, of grace, of status. In simpler homes, the breakfast was plainer. A slice of bread, a cup of weak tea or milk, perhaps porridge, slowly stirred and salted. But still, it was eaten with care, seated by the fire, the silence broken only by the crackle of wood and the ticking of the long case clock. Outside, chimney smoke curled into the morning fog. The world moved slowly. Politeness ruled the hour. In Regency England, breakfast was not a feast, it was a ritual. Quiet, elegant, and never ever hurried. The early sun crept over Istanbul's domes and minarets, casting gold upon the rooftops and cobbled lanes. Birds circled above the Bosphorus, and the call to prayer echoed softly from distant mosques, blending into the rhythm of a city waking slowly. In the Ottoman Empire, breakfast was both humble and full of grace, a balance of flavor, simplicity, and comfort. Along winding streets, vendors carried trays piled high with simmet-round sesame-covered bread rings, crisp on the outside, soft within. Still warm from the bakery, they were sold from baskets, carts, or even balanced atop the heads of shouting boys weaving through the alleys. A man might purchase one with a few copper coins and sit beneath an awning, the city moving gently around him, in his other hand a small cup of strong black tea served in a delicate tulip-shaped glass. No sugar, no rush. Alongside the simmet, slices of white cheese, beyaz peynir, were served. Salty, cool, and cut fresh from brine. A few olives, green or black, often marinated in lemon and herbs, added a bright tang. If the season allowed, cucumbers or tomatoes might be sliced and laid out on small plates. In wealthier homes, the spread grew richer. Clotted cream and honey, dried fruits, jams, and warm flatbreads. But even the poorest man with only tea and simmet was never rushed. Breakfast was a moment of rest, of pause, of gentle gratitude. The sea glistened. The breeze carried the scent of cardamom and roasted nuts from nearby stalls. And all across the empire, from grand palaces to quiet courtyards, people greeted the morning with bread, cheese, and stillness. In the Ottoman world, breakfast was not loud. It was soft, round, and shared. Morning in Victorian England arrived with chimney smoke and church bells, with the shuffle of boots and the clatter of cartwheels over cobblestone. Whether in a grand London townhouse or a crowded Manchester tenement, breakfast was a necessity, not a delight, but a duty, a start to another day of order, work, and routine. In working-class homes, the day began before the sun had risen. Coal fires were stoked back to life, and a pot of porridge was set on the grate. It was made from oats or barley, slow-cooked, thick and plain, sometimes a pinch of salt, sometimes a trickle of milk. if one could spare it. The warmth filled the belly, even if the flavor did not. Bread and dripping the fat skimmed from roast meats was another common choice. It was greasy, salty, and filling. In upper-class households, things were more refined, but still oddly restrained. A typical breakfast table might feature kippers split and smoked herring served warm, their scent sharp and lingering in the air. Alongside were poached eggs, toast cut into perfect triangles, grilled tomatoes or mushrooms arranged neatly on china. A silver teapot sat near the edge of the table, always full. But no matter the class, tea was central, dark, hot, and strong. It warmed cold hands, cleared sleepy heads, and helped steel the heart for another foggy day. A governess might sip quietly in the corner. A factory boy might eat with fingers beside the stove. Parents rarely lingered. Time was precious, and work waited. Breakfast in Victorian England was not joyful or lavish. It was practical, plain, proper. A reflection of the age itself, disciplined, dutiful, and always on schedule. The 1920s in America ushered in a new world of cars, radios, and rising cities. Jazz floated through open windows. Skyscrapers clawed at the sky. And even in the kitchen, everything was changing. The modern age had arrived, and breakfast was no exception. Gone were the long, heavy morning meals of the past. Speed and convenience became the new gods of the table. In middle-class homes, from Chicago to Philadelphia, the clang of a spoon against a ceramic bowl signaled a new ritual: breakfast cereal, cornflakes, grape nuts, wheaten dry, boxed and advertised as healthy. Created in sanitariums and sold in bright packaging, they promised purity, energy, and modern science in every bite. A mother poured the crisp flakes into bowls, followed by a splash of cold milk from a glass bottle left by the milkman just an hour before. No stoves, no fire, just breakfast poured and eaten in minutes. Next to the bowl sat a glass of orange juice, freshly squeezed or poured from a bottle. Thanks to clever marketing, oranges became the morning fruit. Doctors and newspapers said the vitamin C could keep you strong, help you grow, even ward off colds. The father might read the morning paper, tie halfway knotted, sipping a cup of coffee while the children crunched cereal beside him. No servants, no silverware sets, just a clean table, a ticking clock, and the sound of a modern home in motion. Outside, the world was rushing forward, flappers danced, radios buzzed, and assembly lines hummed. And inside, breakfast had become something new, efficient, easy, American, a product of factories and farms, eaten quickly before work and school. In the 1920s, breakfast didn't slow you down, it launched you into the future. The war was over. The factories were quieting. Soldiers were coming home, and in kitchens around the world, life was beginning to feel ordinary again. It was the late 1940s and early 1950s, a time of calm after chaos, a time to rebuild and to return to routine. In homes across America, Britain, and much of Europe, the morning meal reflected this new rhythm, simple, steady, and familiar. No feasts, no extravagance, just toast and coffee. A mother stood at the counter in a neat kitchen, the linoleum floor cooled beneath her slippers. A slice of white bread popped up from the toaster, browned just at the edges. She buttered it slowly, spreading margarine from a foil-wrapped block. Sometimes she added jam, strawberry, apricot, maybe orange marmalade if it was left from wartime rations. The coffee percolated on the stovetop, bubbling gently. Its rich scent filled the air, strong, dark, and comforting. For many, this was the first good coffee in years. During the war, substitutes had been common ground acorns, chicory, barley. But now the real thing was back, and it felt like a quiet luxury. In Britain, A cup of black tea might replace coffee, paired with toast and maybe a boiled egg. In France, it was bread dipped in warm milk. But the spirit was the same modest food, made with care. The father read the paper at the table. Children sat quietly, swinging their legs beneath their chairs. Outside, bicycles rolled past, and delivery trucks rumbled over quiet streets. There was a calmness to it all, a sense of return. In the post-war world, breakfast wasn't loud or exciting, but it was dependable, warm, and after years of uncertainty, that was more than enough. Today, the world wakes up in 1,000 different ways. There are no single rules, no fixed rituals. Breakfast has become as varied as the people who eat it. A meal of anything, or sometimes nothing at all. A college student rushes out the door, earbuds in, biting into a breakfast burrito wrapped in foil. A tired parent sips lukewarm coffee from a travel mug while driving through morning traffic. Somewhere else, a teenager scrolls through their phone between spoonfuls of brightly colored cereal. Across the world, some still hold a tradition: a hot bowl of rice porridge in Beijing, a buttery croissant in Paris, idli and sambar on a banana leaf in Chennai, or fresh bread dipped in olive oil in a quiet Mediterranean village. Others embrace the modern protein shakes, overnight oats, avocado toast arranged just right for a photo. We eat breakfast at our desks, in crowded subways, or standing barefoot in the kitchen in pajamas. Some eat alone in silence. Others gather around a table laughing between bites. And some skip it entirely, reaching for caffeine and convenience instead. Microwaves hum, phones buzz. The world spins faster than it ever has, and breakfast has learned to keep up. But even in all this noise, some things remain the same. The soft warmth of the first bite, the smell of toast or tea or fresh fruit, the stillness that sometimes lingers in those first minutes of the day. No matter where we live, no matter what we eat, breakfast is still, at its core, the beginning. A small pause before the world fully wakes. And in that pause, something ancient lives on the quiet human act of greeting the day with food, with warmth, and with hope.